What if the deepest bowels of the program
Now you're talking.
Isn't extraterrestrials, isn't interdimensional beings, isn't ultra-terrestrials? Perhaps those things all exist, and perhaps that's not the craziest part about it. Perhaps the craziest part is how our consciousness interfaces with reality. That is the reason that they're seeking it out. That is the reason they created these gate projects. That is the reason they created all these secret spies and have all this research tied up. Perhaps it's the reason seemingly our consciousness is being suppressed through devices.
Mm-hmm.
And these devices are getting more and more addictive, and we're spending more and more time in front of them, because if we suddenly grasp the idea that wave functions don't collapse randomly, that they collapse through really strong intention, then we become the masters of the universe, at least of our perception of the universe. And the more, you look into this stuff, the more that like these hermetic principles seem to be at the foundation of it. Somehow everything relates to it.
We were just saying, like, we've done so many of these, plus we've hung out in person so many times at this point that it's like, oh, we're worried about, repeating ourselves, and we're worried about what we haven't talked about. But one of the things I do definitely want to talk to you about is, Chris pre-Area 52, mentally, philosophically, versus Chris now in this state where Area 52 has like completely established itself. Like like I would imagine anytime you start a creative project, you're sort of like, you have an idea of where you're going, and you had a very good idea of where you were going in the beginning compared to most people, aesthetically, thematically, whatever. But then once the thing starts really gaining momentum and you see what works and it really becomes this thing, obviously you get on this hamster wheel in one respect, but in another respect, you're sort of like mentally and psychologically and philosophically changing yourself as a reflection of like what you're putting out. So I guess, to reduce this down to a question, do you think Area 52 has like philosophically changed you or like pushed you in any new directions personally?
Definitely. And as you say that, it is 11:11 on my time. So there's a short answer. But yeah, I guess the longer answer would be definitely, especially synchronicity. I seem to, especially post Monroe, we always go back to that, but post sort of discovering the astral and that type of stuff, I've been more open to allowing synchronicity to be the sort of driving force, or at least directional force, of a lot of my decision making. I think we had this conversation again.
Probably, yeah.
Yeah, probably. But it wasn't Hal Puthoff that said something. I don't know who said this. Maybe Jesse told me this, but like Hal Puthoff said that like, if he doesn't notice the synchronicities, then he'll stop doing something.
Interesting.
You know what I mean? And that's kind of what I've adopted, I think, at least, at the very least, like philosophically speaking, is, yeah, I think if I notice the synchronicities, I tend to lean more in that direction cautiously. And then if I don't, I tend to ask myself, well, what's going on here? What's not lining up?
Yeah. Yeah. And I think to me, synchronicity points to one of these kinds of knowing and one of these layers of phenomena that we've conveniently sort of just scapegoated or sacrificed at the altar of, scientific materialistic reductionism, because you can fully seemingly make sense of reality by breaking it down using that method into its bits and pieces, and in like sequential, this happened because I did this, or because that happened, in this sort of chain reaction that you can reduce down to its initial cause. And synchronicity is not like that. Like, synchronicity is one of those things that is purely made of meaning, and it is completely reliant on both the observer of the meaning and this orthogonal thing coming from the outside hitting your mind in a way that makes sense to you.
Yeah.
And that is not reduced. I mean, that's part of Jung's definition, or part of what Jung put in his synchronicity book. It's an a-causal connecting principle, right? It's like you cannot reduce it to a physical cause. And that's one of those things that for me completely keeps that more mystical, wonderful, meaningful way of looking at the world alive. Because
Yeah.
I too have experienced so many that were so big that it's like there's no way I can reduce this to chance. This is nuts.
Hmm.
What are some? Do you have any particular big ones that stick out to you as really like this is nuts?
Yeah, the one I think I definitely talked about was like this 11/11 coming up
Right.
over and over and over, and then going to the UAP hearing at Congress on the flying to deciding to fly to DC when I got a text from Jesse saying I think we should go. We were kind of on the fence, and it was like the 11th of November, and I sent him a screenshot of potential flights, in case we wanted to change our entire trip around and go to
Hmm.
this thing because we were already going somewhere else. And I screenshotted at 11/11 on the 11th of the 11th, and because we ended up shifting there, it's where I initially met Lou Elizondo, where I initially met James Fox, where I initially met UAP Gerb, and so many other people. And through that was able to have Lou on the podcast, which was for me one of the biggest podcasts I did at the time, probably maybe still
Yeah.
is. And then James Fox as well, and so it really kind of, I think, helped catapult the channel at least. And so for that, I wouldn't have made that decision had I not been aware of the 11/11 connection or synchronicity. I would not have made that decision. Now it stands to argue that perhaps I'd still be here in some other way, or that I'd be further along somehow, or that I'd be less further, right? That
Hmm.
you can make that argument. But I believe, and that's the beauty of synchronicity, it is subjective. That sort of progression of events led me to exactly where I wanted to be and where I needed to be, I suppose. And so, yeah, that was a big one for me. But again, I think the beauty of synchronicity, even though it is subjective, it is in your own mind's eye, this sort of cosmic connection that happens. I don't think that takes away from anything. And that's the
No.
thing. Like, people can reduce things to a science, and that's okay. If you look at a magic trick, for example, you can tell me the method, right? But that doesn't change how it makes someone feel, right? Even if they know the method, I can still fool you. I can still make you feel a certain way. I can still make you feel that moment of wonder. So, sure, we can explain things, but that doesn't make it less meaningful.
Yeah. Meaning in and of itself has to be a subjective thing, right? Because
Sure.
nothing is meaningful without a person or an entity or a mind there to appreciate it. So
Hmm.
the idea that it's subjective, again, I think because of this innate way of viewing reality that is so like infiltrated by reducing things down to their causes and being objective, we have something in our mind that feels like it wants to diminish the subjective. And
Yeah.
I do this too because like I don't trust people. I don't trust people's judgment that I don't know, especially. I don't trust every weird, and I hear a lot of weird, crazy out there stories, as you do too. And for the most part, I let them land on my psyche with a oh, cool.
Yeah.
And I don't really let it shift my belief, the way I approach reality. Maybe over time, collecting those will gradually turn the ship a degree or two to being like, I've heard enough stories of, I don't know, people going out and doing CE5 or psionic stuff or whatever to think, yeah, you know what? I think that that's probably true. I
Yeah.
haven't had an undeniable experience like that yet, but I think it's probably true. So things like that, yeah, for sure. They will accumulate and they will shift my belief, but I'm also okay with somehow balancing both of these things that sound
Yeah.
contradictory. One, that I think subjectivity it is just as important as objectivity, obviously, and meaning is completely constructed of subjectivity. Yet at the same time, I don't necessarily trust everybody's subjective experience or place them on a spectrum. And that circles back to something really key in everything you do with your channel, and I guess I do on my channel too. Um, is so much of it is reliant on the subjective stuff, on people's stories,
Yeah.
on accounts of things. And how do you how do you balance that in your own mind when you're reading a novel story and you're like, "Man, I really don't know, but I can't resist putting this story out there. Like, I could go on, but
Um,
I don't want to. I
yeah,
don't want to put words in your mouth.
yeah. I get what you're saying, and you know, I guess for people who need some type of answer, that would be a more difficult process. I think if you're not necessarily seeking an answer, I think the road to truth, won't provide you with an answer. I think it's just simply more information that you can hold up to the light, uh, you know, over time. And then whatever you choose to believe, if you choose to believe something or not, comes from those experiences and that collection of data and looking at everything. But it really is a choice, and it really is something subjective once again. So it's like, I would rather all information regarding the anomalous activity that's been going on in the world be held in a subjective suspension, that we can just be okay with the idea of suspending it, without committing to anything. I think that that's an exercise that we should practice more. And so that's what I try to do. And so it is cathartic at the same time. I think I am also learning as I read through a lot of things, and I'm making connections, and I'm thinking more about, how I feel about things. But at the same time, I'm practicing sort of suspending things and trying not to debunk something. Like, my rational mind, my magician head is, obviously there's a method here. This
Hmm.
is clearly, there's a method. But I'm like, all right, let's put that aside. Let's say it isn't the method that I described. Let's say it's something else. Well, what does that feel like? What could that be? And I think by doing that over and over and over and over, your mind starts to get to a place where naturally, when information is collected, it is instantly hypothetically expanding your worldview
Yeah.
rather than being ignored or being shoved into a model. And when that happens, it tends to make the whimsy greater, and
Yeah.
it tends to be more joyful and playful. And I think that's where I want to be emotionally, mentally. I want to be in a place that is malleable, that is playful, that isn't so cut and dry binary. And I think people resonate with that. I think that, introducing the information in that way through not only the information, but also the visual storytelling, I think it creates this sense of wonder and this sense of what if, and let's just keep it up in the air and have fun with it. No one's going to judge you. No one's sitting here at the end of the day with a gavel and being like, well, what do you believe? Who cares? Doesn't matter. Let's just have fun. And so maybe, yeah, maybe there are people out there who would have a harder time with that because their sort of core philosophy is, do I believe, do I not believe? And that's okay too. I just challenge people to maybe suspend that knee jerk reaction when they're getting information, in order to perhaps, yeah, just play with it a little bit more.
Yeah. You know what struck me as you were talking is, have you ever heard the word enantiodromia?
No,
It
that's a
means
long ass word.
it's something Jung would talk about a lot, but it's
Enantiodromia?
yeah,
Enantiodromia. Okay.
it's essentially this concept that things have a tendency to over time morph into their opposite. And it was
Hmm.
striking me as you were saying that you could actually construe magic based Chris in some ways, who is like living for learning tricks, executing tricks, has metamorphosized into someone who's actually actively looking for something where there is no trick, where it is
Hmm.
actually real. Like, there is something, there's no sleight of hand, there's no smoke and mirrors.
Yeah.
There's a real mystery. And it almost feels like you're turning into that person, or maybe it's not that you're turning into it. It's like that there's a union of opposites occurring, where there's some kind,
Perhaps.
yeah.
I would argue that that's always been the case, and that the pursuit of wonder and, when seeing a magic trick for the first time, you're like, oh my God, that's impossible. It's, I need to know how this is possible. And then once you know it, now there's this, okay, what do I do with this? Do I just how do I build upon it? All right, now it becomes sort of this world building exercise of, performance. And but both matter, both, method and result or effect, both matter equally. And what also matters, especially in magic, is the spectator. And that's something that I've learned throughout my journey, where at first I didn't have. At first I was thinking more about personal gain. How do I, get that feeling of that rush of when I perform something and I get away with it,
Right.
versus now being like, oh, the magic doesn't exist if you're not here. And the magic doesn't exist if I'm not here. In fact, it takes both of us to create the magic. Without one, the other, like, magic does not exist. And that took me several years to really appreciate. And once you have that, you start focusing a little bit more on the experience and what it means for both yourself and the spectator, what you could both take away from a performance. And so, yeah, in that case, yeah, I would say that there are sort of like peaks and valleys of discovery and reasoning why. But I think the underlying thing with everything, whether it's puzzles or whether it's magic or whether it's UFOs, is the search for wonder, like that maybe almost like a drug, right?
Yeah.
Maybe there is something there of like this wondrous moment of feeling like a kid again, seeing something for the first time. That is addictive when when you experience it over and over. You kind of, the bar tends to be raised and expanded on, how else can we achieve this feeling?
Do pardon the interloping, my friends. Can one interlope upon themselves? That is a brain tingler that we will save for another transmission. You may have noticed that I have shortened my introductions, yet tickling the algorithm, stimulating it in all ways does remain of the utmost importance. So please do like, subscribe, comment, share. I am trying to hit 200K subs at least before the end of the year. Also, we do have an ever swelling library of member-only / patron-only content, both on the YouTube members page and at patreon.com /third eye drops. If you do join via the latter, you'll also get access to a patron-only Discord server and access to live mind melds with myself, occasional special guests, along with, of course, a number of other seekers just like yourself. I do hope to commune with you there, but in the meantime, back to the mind meld. Totally, man. Yeah, novelty is one of those psychological needs that we have. And I don't know if you'll necessarily find it in those exact words in a psychology textbook. Though honestly, you might, because I remember I read a book a while ago on flow states, and that's one of the core needs to enter a flow state is encountering novelty. And even just small things like go a new place, walk a different
Yep.
way, eat a new thing, you read something new, like that
Seeing a
alters.
combination of colors that sparks
Yeah,
something that's like, oh, that's an interesting palette. Or
yeah,
yeah.
it does something that has a direct downstream effect on your creativity, on your mental health, and in a more broad sense. But do you do specific things to try to like keep that going? Because you actually seem like a pretty um from what I've gathered, you actually do seem like sort of a process oriented person, like that you know you have your place that you go every day to create. Obviously it seems like really cool, and you have multiple different types of spaces to be in within that space, but
Mm-hmm.
still you're in the same place a lot, it seems like. So are there things that you do to try to like fondle your novelty nuggets, like to get
Yes.
things going?
Yes, definitely. Building and creating and thinking about new set designs is something I'm constantly doing. And if I didn't do that, the stagnancy, I think, would prove to have a negative effect on me. And so I'm constantly trying to expand this little universe in terms of building new sets, but also perhaps sometimes even just simply in the edit, right? If I'm doing the same type of video over and over, I do feel a reluctancy to wanting to do that because I think it's not novelty for novelty's sake. And maybe it is to spark creativity. But I also think that there is something about recognizing change and being stimulated by change as a fundamental, like, physiological human trait. Like, for example, the Gansfeld effect, right?
Yeah.
If you have the ping pong balls with the red light or the frequency in your ear after a certain amount of time, you stop hearing the frequency, you're just seeing black, you don't see red anymore. Our mind grows accustomed to things that are stagnant. And in there, you're not learning, therefore, you're not growing, you're not expanding as a person. So I think there is something to be said about novelty not only being a catalyst for creativity, but being essential to a thriving human being. And so I found myself that if I have those, that sort of spur of new things, or whether it's a book or a movie or whatever, I kind of need to draw from that to simply just be.
Yeah, for
I
sure.
feel I feel really, I get, and I, probably people can resonate with that too, but I get really down if things start looking the same and feeling the same.
Yeah.
And I've noticed what it was. I didn't know what it was before. I was like, why am I feeling like this? I have everything. Why am I feeling like this? Oh, it's this need for change, this need for something different to get me out of my comfort zone, to help me learn and grow. I think that's the more important thing. Not necessarily change, but growing. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, there's a couple different like philosophical riffs I could flow into off of that. But before we get away from the Gansfeld stuff, um, so for people that don't know what this Gansfeld effect or Gansfeld technique is, it's I don't know where it was first used, but it's a way that you can alter your consciousness by essentially putting you subject yourself to red light. Is it flashing red light?
I think it's a constant red light.
Okay, a constant red light. You have like traditionally, at least, you have like halved ping pong balls like covering your eyes, and then you have like white noise playing in headphones. And this apparently evokes reliable exotic states of consciousness where
And
people
higher psi ability apparently too.
yeah. I know it's been involved in psi experiments. It has this sort of Stranger Things esque kind of air about it.
Hmm.
But I wish I knew more about the history of it, how it's used. But people will report things like very Monroe like things, like out of body type things, or like encountering entities or faces, or like you said, increased psi. Is this an area you've played around in specifically,
I
or just know about?
I haven't played with it so much, but I have discussed it. Graham Nichols.
Yeah.
Have you spoken to Graham?
No, no.
Okay, you need to do a podcast with Graham. I'll link you guys up. He's
Okay.
amazing, but he's done a lot of work in this area because he was looking for techniques to leave the body and to sort of facilitate that. And he's come up with a few successful techniques that are really, including like muscle tension and release,
Mm,
sort of exhausting the physical. So that and so he has all these. But one thing that he talks about more than everything is um, sort of shutting down the other senses and the sensory deprivation.
yeah.
And that idea isn't new in the out of body, the astral, the psi stuff. We know that if you shut down certain senses, that the other sentence seem to get heightened,
Yep.
including potentially, the ones that are linked to parapsychology. And so I think that this has that effect where, your eyes and your ears are now out of the game, and therefore perhaps there are other senses that begin to get heightened because of this.
Yeah. It totally makes sense. And it seems like regardless of how you're doing it, whether it's like, thousands of years ago in like a dark retreat or what the Greeks called a katabasis, where they'd go down into some kind of chamber and they would just stay there for days in the
Mm.
dark. And a lot of these, so the Greek word for these guys is iatromantis, which means like healer seer. But essentially these guys were like these proto philosopher shamans who would both be wise people in a traditional sense, like intellectual sense, but then they do this, like Pythagoras would do this, where he'd go
Hmm.
down into a chamber and he would just stay there. And there's crazy legends about like people staying in these places for like years or hundreds of years or whatever, and then they'd come out like 200 years later or something. But there's all these stories of like, Pythagoras would go down into this cave and then he'd show up in some place by locating, like hard
Right.
by locating, like another body literally in another place. So whether it's stuff like that, which yogis, of course, also did, people from the world over also did, or even just doing like a Monroe type meditation where
Yeah,
you're
Focus 10 or
yeah,
whatever.
you're putting an eye mask on, you're putting headphones on, and you're or just reading like the Platonic sages, like Plotinus would talk about this exact same thing: withdraw the senses, remove the stains, he would say, of the outer world, and then you'll achieve the inner world, and you can begin this like ascension
Right.
process. It sound that 100% is part of it. But yeah, I am interested in this Gansfeld technique for sure.
We should try it out.
It sounds
We should
intense.
get together and do some like psi testing using the Gansfeld effect, because it's like from what I've understood too, like Joe McMoneagle did this at the
Mm,
Monroe Institute in the weekends when he was trying to leave his body. That's how they would get there. Is once you get to the point of you're seeing black and you're not hearing anymore, that's kind of the hypnagogic state that you need to be in to sort of leave the body. And so when you're there, you're kind of aware of it. You're still lucid, but now you're in this like state. So
yeah.
that's how like that's the pocket. And sometimes you'll click out and fall asleep in that pocket, but that's
Yes.
essentially where it is. And the other thing I wanted to add to that was, Dr. Edwin May, when he's
Hmm.
looking into how to detect or how to more accurately perceive a target, you know, entropy was a big thing that he'd mentioned, where if they would pour liquid nitrogen at the site of a target, it would yield a, more accurate
Whoa.
description of the target. And so, yeah, that's why they have an easier time seeing these nuclear bases or these hostage situations or missing children or a missile rather than remote viewing, a stagnant like a rock or something. It Because on some maybe morphic field or some quantum field, it's creating change. It's entropy. And our minds and perhaps our consciousness to an extent detects change a lot easier,
Yeah.
right? Just like our physical, just like our eyes. Wouldn't that make sense that like subconsciously we would also detect change, if you're thinking of the same word over and over again versus if you're thinking of really crazy and more visual words, maybe I can pick up on that easier. Like that would make sense to me. So again, it's this idea of dampening the senses and then creating some type of change out there, that
Yeah.
attracts you.
Was it McMonagall that said the more effort is put into secrecy around something, the more it glows or something?
Ah,
Like
yeah.
something like that. Like if you really are trying, you're exerting all this mental energy around something to protect it, to cloister it, it somehow sticks out in the mental. It's very, very
Yeah, I mean, you're
interesting.
putting more intention behind it
Yeah.
again. So, like, yeah, I mean, who knows? One day we'll all have the proper terminology for all of this stuff, I'm sure.
Yeah.
But it is fun to like start to scratch the surface. I do foresee that. I do foresee maybe not us, but maybe in 100 years, them looking back at discussions like this and being like, they were close. They
Yeah.
were almost there. They were kind of talking about what we're doing right now, but like before knowing about it.
Well, dude, I know we've talked about this, but the more I even again, ashamed to say, still haven't done any remote viewing. But even as someone who's only studied remote viewing and talked to a bunch of these people at this point, I look back on that weird ending of the gateway process paper now, the declassified one, where there's sort of this list of implications and things to do, where they're talking about like building structures within different focus levels and these things that you're reading that you're like, what is this? Like talking about building up psychic defenses and stuff around different structures, like mentally.
Yeah,
Um, it sounds like what does this
it
mean?
sounds
How
absurd.
how can this even be true? But I'll tell you, man, especially after talking to Lynn Buchanan, I started to think this could be more real because he have we talked about like active mental work and
No,
okay, so remote viewing is considered to be a passive mental work because you're not affecting, like you're not
I see.
attempting to mentally affect anything. And Lynn told me that when he first got to Fort Meade, he had already had a bunch of like PK type stuff happen to him earlier in his life. Like he would have the what he called the poltergeist child thing where he would freak out and then like something would break or fall down or whatever. Um So that's he says the way that he got recruited into the program is he was stationed in Germany. He's a computer scientist. He's managing the database for like NATO and like some other like big computer database stuff early in the day of computer databases before they were all talking well using, agnostic software that we probably figured out like 30, 40 years ago. He was like helping program this stuff. So the way he got recruited, he said, is he programmed this whole thing. He had a big presentation to give to all these like big wigs, high ranking NATO guys. And he had this rival basically who was another computer programmer that basically sabotaged his program before he showed it to them. And he got super pissed off and basically had a poltergeist or whatever you want to call it, like a
Yeah,
PK event where
fry the computers.
he fried the computers. And then this is the scene that's in Men Who Stare at Goats where I don't remember what his name is in the movie, but the guy who's basically General Stubblebine
Stubblebine, yeah.
takes him into a room and says, "Did you kill my computers with your mind?"
Yeah,
And
and he's so happy about it.
he reluctantly said, "Yes, sir, I did." Like he wanted to lie about it, but he said, "Yes, sir, I did." And apparently the response was far fucking out. I have a job for you. And then that's when he got recruited into the program. That's what he says. So anyway, they knew he had this history. And
Yeah.
then when he got to Fort Meade, they basically said, "We don't do any of that stuff." He's like, "Okay, so
Mhm.
you don't do any active mental work here." And he said the way that I don't remember who he said this to him. I think it was whoever the commanding officer was at the time. Not sure if it was Skip yet or who it was, but he said, "Right, we don't do any of that here." He sort of
Right.
said it like they do it somewhere
Yeah.
else. So
Yeah.
any kind of like more out there stuff, like trying to psychically injure someone or assassinate someone or any of the
Yeah,
more
remotely influence
remote
things.
influencing. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think there's enough circumstantial evidence to make me think maybe that's true. And Lynn would even
Mhm.
say, the goat thing, like that's in the movie. I actually haven't seen the movie, which is probably, you
I've
know,
seen it a few times.
sacrilegious of me.
I
But there
rented out a theater to watch it
Oh, that's cool,
alone
man.
for the when I did the remote viewing thing. We filmed one of the cutscenes, and I was alone eating popcorn, watching Many Stare Goats in a giant old theater. So yeah,
That's
fun
awesome.
fun little aside.
I think the thing that's kept me away from it is that they're sort of just they're making fun of it, right? They're not
Yep.
actually taking it seriously at all,
Yeah.
which was I think is one of the things that has turned me off from it. But there's the scene where Clooney's character, who apparently is again loosely based on Lynn, um, does the thing where he kills the goat with his mind.
Mhm.
And Lynn says that he did not do that, but that is real and that did actually happen and that it's not even that hard to do. And
I
it's just like,
really whoa.
yes, that's what he said. So,
I
yeah.
heard about the mice, like they would do that on mice and stuff, but like to do an actual, yeah, it's kind of crazy.
Yeah, and I mean, well, you know the story because I think they do show it in the scene because I've seen the scene in the movie. I
Yeah,
haven't seen the whole movie, like I said, but
concentrate on the goat.
yeah, but they do the whole thing where they sort of like tormented the goat. Like they would
Yeah.
shoot the goat, and then they'd have to like it was part of their training to have to like do field medicine
Mhm.
on the goat after they injured it and nurse it back to health and stuff. It does sound like something they really would have done, sadly,
Yeah.
in the history of
Yeah, it's not the saddest thing they do, I'm sure.
I'm sure not. I'm sure not. But yeah, man, this possibility of active mental work of some kind is terrifying because the downstream implication of it, if it's true, is that that's going on some kind of clandestine level that we have no idea about. Like that there could be like some kind
Yeah.
of shamanistic psychic psycho warfare happening all the
Yeah.
time that we have no idea about. And that's a terrifying idea.
Yeah, and it's also, I mean, the thing is that differentiates us and like the ancients is technology, right? So you'd have to assume that we've used or are trying to adapt a technology that amplifies this, right? Like that makes way more sense to me than just practicing and taking notes. Like, why wouldn't we actively be inducing some type of hormone, in the brain, or some stimulant via electric shock, or like whatever. Like you have to imagine they've tried the gamut here. They've done
Yeah.
everything, and out of that they've probably found some interesting stuff, like, hey, if you hit them with psilocybin, an
Yeah.
insane dose of psilocybin, and then, punch them in the face. And then, like
Yeah. Yeah.
they probably have these like weird methods for getting spikes. And then from there have developed technology to try and like that, I would assume is the route. If I had an unlimited budget, it would be like, all right, test everything. This is the military we're talking about. They're not going to shy away from, maybe we won't do psilocybin because it's illegal, or maybe we won't do it
Yeah.
on children because that's unethical. No, of course they're doing it. They're doing everything
Yeah,
because
dude.
in their minds, killing one person to save 1,000 is justifiable.
Yeah.
And so that's how they measure it out, right? And so everything is on the table. Nothing is off the table. Nothing. And that is a scary thought.
Totally, man.
The idea that there is nothing you can think of that the smartest people in the world haven't already conjured up somewhere in some windowless room.
And as much as I don't like it and you don't like it from our POV sitting in like, maybe we don't live in muggle reality compared to like other
Yeah,
people who are completely uninitiated. But let's just say this, Chris. Like let's just say you and I are brought into a skiff and they show us that this mental warfare shit is very real and that it's not just nations versus nations, it's NHI. And there's a whole like metaphysical world.
sure.
I'm getting chills saying this right now, dude. And there's this whole metaphysical world that we aren't aware of, but that we are passively operating in most of the time, except for the small group of humans who have figured out. And this is kind of what Ingo said too, in a weird way. Paul was telling me in the last pod we did that humans have like these abilities latent, whereas NHI or whatever you want to call them, they're very adept in this naturally. But once humans awaken that capacity, we actually have capacities that they don't have. So that there are some entities within that realm that actively want to suppress, and then there are some that want to help us,
Yeah.
etc. So
According to Bob Lazar, when he read some of those blue documents, that was one of the things that stood out was this a consciousness suppression
yeah,
from the NHI.
yeah.
So I mean that's something I
So
think about too, where I'm like, yeah, that makes sense. You would want to keep those guys chill if you want to control them.
yes, dude. So there are multiple strains off of this idea I think would be fun to riff on. But where I was going initially is that your and I, our moral ideas about what's okay to do to people might change based on information like that.
Yeah,
Maybe we learn about like the reality of the soul or something. So it's like, yeah, it's really unfortunate that we kind of have to torture people to get to this point, but they're all who cares? Like they'll if maybe death isn't even the worst thing now that we know
yeah,
information X, Y, and Z. So even though it's crazy and it's inhumane from our perspective, I'm also open to the idea that I have no fucking idea what's going on, and the morals
yeah.
get foggy in light of new information
Of
sometimes.
course.
But yeah, what you're talking about to induce these states, and I could name names, but I'm not going to name any names because one, I just don't want to tell people stories that maybe don't want to be told, and two, I don't ultimately know the provenance of some of these things. But you hear a lot about ketamine which does get you into states that are more induced, that are more primed to make a person want to go out of body, let's say,
Yep.
because you're deeply shutting down the physical,
Mm-hmm.
dissociating from the physical. You hear a lot about you hear about spinning people, like putting people in like a spinning device,
Yep.
and that somehow evokes an out of body state. Yeah, you hear about mental trauma, you hear about
Sedation,
sedation, yeah, all
uh,
kinds of things, man.
hormonal suppressants, like all sorts of like weird stuff that you know. Yeah, I'm again, like I mean, like you said, there's no. It's hard to draw a line on what's right and wrong in this incredibly complex infrastructure of emotion and information, and it's really really tough to say because what's right today might be wrong tomorrow. What's wrong today might be right tomorrow. There is that what is that old Taoist sort of adage or story about the farmer and his kid, with the horses. With the farmer, he has a horse, and the neighbor goes, "Oh, that's good," and then he loses his horse, and the neighbor goes, "Oh, that's bad," and he's like, "Ah," and he's like, he wins a horse back, and the neighbor goes, "Oh, that's good." He's like, "It's no really good or bad." and then his son rides the horse and he wins a championship. And he goes, "Oh, that's good." But then his son falls off the horse and breaks his leg, and he goes, "Oh, that's bad." But then conscription comes along and he can't be conscripted into the army because he has a broken leg. And you go, "Oh,
Right.
well, I guess that's good." And it's just kind of this like, we don't
Mhm.
know what's good or bad. And I guess the simpler way to look at that is there is no good or bad. It's all varying degrees of the same thing. Um, you know, Sort of one of the hermetic principles, but that's kind of, I think, how it is. It's a spectrum of all sorts of things, but there is no binary answer to good or bad. There might be in this small temporal chunk,
Right. That's where I
but
was gonna go.
but
Yeah.
outside of that, it starts to weave back and forth. So yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
I think my view is almost inside out from that, because I do think that what appears to be moral, or the morality that like functions within reality the way that we need it to, is definitely subject to relativity and
Hmm.
what's good for this type of life. But I think
Yeah,
if you're, and this is kind of what the Platonists believed, is that like anything, including evil, like their answer to the problem of evil is like, essentially the problem of evil is a thing that exists in Plato's cave, because Plato's
yeah,
cave, like
yep,
this more,
yeah. We don't
it's
know why it's evil.
right.
We don't know what the reason for them being
Yeah.
evil is. Yeah,
Yeah. So they had this concept of generation. I don't want to get like super deep into weird Platonic metaphysics, but so basically they had this idea of generation within the world soul. So the world soul is essentially the whole kind of like physical cosmos and nature, and then there's this like one soul that stretches over all of that. And then within that soul there's this phenomenon they call generation, and that's birth and death and physical, cycles and all of those things. But outside of that is actually that's Plato's cave, though.
hmm,
And then when you go outside of that and you start going into these higher and higher mental metaphysical realms, that stuff doesn't exist anymore. Like you're just
right.
living in the land of like immortal principles and immortal concepts and archetypes, and there's no evil in that realm at all. Like it's all like those things could act upon our realm in a way that feels very evil to us, right? Like if there's
Yeah.
some archetype that possesses a dictator and he, does unimaginably horrific war crimes, like, yeah, that
Hmm.
is absolutely evil from our perspective, but it's actually not even because that archetype or that energy is evil. It's because of the complexity with which it interacts with our world. And
Yeah.
it's like it's so it gets so
Even
weird.
our
Yeah.
view of what is objectively evil is kind of myopic too. Like, I mean, you know, especially when we're talking about like aliens or
Yeah.
non-humans, people love to categorize things. They love to be like, "Oh, these guys are the good guys. These guys are the bad guys." And it's obviously not that simple. We've made these mistakes before, and they've proved to be horrendous mistakes that we've done because we've categorized an entire people
Right.
based on our initial thoughts of these people. We'd call them savages, or we'd call them this or that, and lump them all into, oh, they're all stupid anyway. And then we treat them a certain way because of that. And then we find out that no, these are individuals that have their own, story and their own arc and their own perhaps, past that, made them the way they are. So there's this incredible complex, a framework of individuals that we tend to lump up together when we hear one story.
Hmm.
And if we hear, let's say we had evidence of a video of, I mean, don't even look at aliens. Let's look at sharks. We see the movie Jaws. Well, after that movie, I mean, they almost hunted great whites to extinction. It was insane.
Yeah.
People were actively cheering on people killing great white sharks. Although they had never been a real problem, now it showcased this potential problem of how dangerous this predator can be. And now it was okay to go and kill all of the great white sharks, although they're a really important part of the homeostasis in the oceans. And so it's that same mentality that I think is incredibly dangerous as we look into like the UFO and extraterrestrial landscape, and we see the grays, even just calling them the grays or the mantids or the Nordics, the Pleiadians. and we say, oh, they're benevolent, these are malevolent, these are good, these are bad. And there might be so many different layers to every one of those encounters, whether it's Travis Walton or whether it's Whitley Strieber. There might be an incomprehensible, like, let's say you go to the doctor when you're a child, right? And he pokes you and you go, ow, what'd you do that for? There's no explaining to a
Yeah.
child why he did that, and so the doctor's just this evil guy. He's just an evil guy that hurts you. You know what I mean? And then come to find out, oh, he was giving you some antibodies, right? And so, oh, now he's a good guy. Oh, but then maybe the antibodies actually weren't tested properly, and now I have a tumor. So maybe he is a bad guy, but he doesn't know it. He's unwittingly a bad guy. But maybe that tumor gives me some foresight and psychic ability.
It makes you a psychic,
It never ends, right? So it's this crazy spectrum that we have to really stop putting everything into a binary category. It's easy. It's instinctual. It's what we're almost bred to do to survive, but we're not in a situation where we necessarily need to do that, where now we can weigh things and we can hold things in suspension and kind of look at them case by case with empathy and through these other lenses. I think that's evolution. I think that's evolving, and that's getting closer to, this higher self that we seek. But acting on fear, acting on instinct, acting on, that's going to be our downfall, man. That is our downfall.
Totally. You know what, like, the shittiest version of that ever is, and I just want to touch on this for a second, but it's such a bummer, so I don't want to like linger on this point, but I think about that every time I put one of my pets through something, man, because they can never understand that. Like
Why are you doing this to me?
my older cat has just had a cancer removed from her mouth, and it took like a pretty intense surgery, and she's older, so I really had to think, like, do I want to put her through this? I ultimately went through it, and now she's doing really well considering. But dude,
She probably has some PTSD.
Yeah. But anyway, before
there's no explaining. Yeah,
no, I know.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. You have to draw the line to, all right, why am I being messed with? Well, that's not good. What are you sticking that in me for? What are you implanting that in my brain for? Like, we don't know, man.
Yeah.
There's no way of telling anything.
Would you become a withered eunuch if you knew that you could get psychic powers out of it?
At what age?
Right now. There's a guy waiting outside in a black Cadillac.
Yeah.
Right now.
Well, okay, what's the range of psychic ability?
That's a good question. Yeah, like how psychic are we?
Are we talking about like Joe McMoneagle remote viewing type? Or are we talking like, Professor X? Like, there's a big range there.
Speak of the devil, the cat's just got the door open somehow. We're talking, let's go mild X-Man. So like above what we know of existing, but you're not Professor X level. Like, you can't.
No, but you're better than any remote viewer that's ever lived.
Yeah, you're that, at least publicly. Yeah,
and you can. Yeah, and you can move stuff with your mind a little bit.
Yeah, you could
telepathy.
If your phone was over there, you could just like look at your phone and have it fly to your hand.
But okay,
but you couldn't do, like, I don't know. Let's say you have a 5 kilogram limit.
Yeah, you have a giant shadow.
Yeah.
Lingering behind you right now because the cat's walking in front of the
and
light.
She has a cone on, so it's extra.
It's so funny. Like this dark shadow, and it's just a cat. Yeah, I would say, cut my junk off. Let's go.
I like it.
Yeah, why not, dude?
Yeah.
I think that would be a fun.
I'm just imagining you showing up to the next contact in the desert in an electric wheelchair, and like you have a giant head, like
big helmet on that, just floating forwards. Yeah, dude, that would be I would take a catheter for that for sure.
More power to you. I'd have to think about that a little harder. Honestly, if I had a friend who also was doing it, I would be more likely, because then we could just mental bullshit. You think about like the mental shit talk and philosophizing, like that'd be
and I think the lack of genitalia probably also creates a lack of desire. So you'd probably become super philosophical and not distracted, and
Yeah,
I
I
feel
mean,
like, if you look at the human species and our diminishing sperm count year over year, almost 2% per year in males since the 80s that we're dropping in sperm count. It's alarming, right? Um, if you fast track that to like its furthest extent, it becomes we are no longer able to reproduce
yeah,
physically. We have to do it all sort of biomedically. And in that case, eventually evolution would diminish the desire to have intimate relationships
for
because it's
sure.
not needed for procreation. And yeah, so I think that maybe that is something we are actively already
Yeah.
becoming.
Well, yeah, clearly like just collective libido is dropping because we see that
Yeah.
and uh, a vicious cycle because if libido drops, it's less likely that you will procreate and you will also be less virile. And so
Hmm.
it just is and I say this as someone without kids. I'm pretty sure you don't have kids, so we're
This is
we're
well, so
yeah.
this is like this reminds me of Michael Masters,
Right.
his theory,
Yeah.
because he talks about this a lot about the diminishing sort of libido and sperm count, but then getting into why are the time travelers here? If that is the truth, and if eventually we just our population decreases because of it or whatever, then maybe we have to send people back in time to collect certain genetics. Well, the gene pool was at its most diverse from the 50s to the 80s
Hmm.
that it's ever been in history of man, in the history of Earth, or as long as humans have been around that we know
Yeah.
of. It's been at its most diverse from the 50s to the 80s without diminishing sperm count, because the 80s, that's when it started, microplastics, all this other stuff.
Cocaine.
Yeah,
That's when they
yeah,
yeah,
absolutely,
you want
yeah.
that 1970s jizz that's like
Right.
pre-plastics, everybody's doing psychedelics.
And
That
people are
that's the
mixing.
moment.
The
That's the
the
moment.
races are mixing because
Yeah.
now it's like okay to have like interracial relationships, and it's not frowned upon. And so the pool of genetics is at its best from the 50s to the 80s, and not by coincidence, that's when the most encounters with non-human
Really
intelligence has happened. Well, I mean,
interesting.
if you look at all of the quote unquote space brothers
Yeah.
stuff that happened from the 50s to the mid 70s, all these Nordics or blondes or human like entities would come and visit us, and then post 80s it really turned into like genderless drones, the grays, and became kind of lackluster. But prior to that, it was a real colorful assortment of entities that would interact with us,
Hmm.
allegedly. And so, hypothetically, if they were doing that, then you'd have to think, oh, these might be time travelers from different times. These
Yeah.
might all be humans from different stages of human evolution that have come back to the really great gene pool of the human, of the human species.
And I think that would actually fit with multiple hypotheses because even if you're talking about like ultra terrestrials or extraterrestrials or whatever flavor, you could argue that what's going on culturally and societally would be particularly novel to them in that time because it's
Yeah.
clearly a big breakthrough, like a
Yes.
big psychic breakthrough with like the art, the music, the psychedelics, like
The
everything that's
tech,
going on at
everything
that
too.
time. Yeah, there's all these huge breakthroughs happening where you could see how that could maybe be a magnet for a lot of different
but
things.
but then like you have this period in time where you absolutely need to go to in order to fix your own time, let's say, right? you
Yeah.
you have no choice. There is no choice. You have the tech. It's unfortunate that you have to use it, but it's the only option we have left. We have to go back, right? So you go back, but in doing so you inadvertently crash or
Mhm.
are taken down, and now that tech is available to them, which then expedites the dropping of
Right.
sperm count
Right.
and everything, and then creates the problem. Now we're in like this like infinite loop of having to go back, and then because we went back, we fucked all of humanity. You know what I mean? And so there's this
Yeah.
this like crazy loop, and then maybe that loop is again expedited if we find out that there are aliens, and maybe that is the reason why we're not allowed to find out. That they won't tell us, they won't give us disclosure because it closes that loop,
Yeah.
and the only way for us to survive is to break free from that loop.
Dude, I was talking to Dolan and Paul Smith about this just a few days ago on, obviously the cool thing is to be like catastrophic disclosure, full-blown information drop, full-blown freedom of speech, no constraints on anything. But we were talking about, okay, what if, like, let's just say, for instance, it seems like we're establishing a pretty strong link between psi and the phenomena, unless that's all bullshit. But it seems like it's not, that there is a way to mentally contact, establish a connection with whatever they are. What if whatever that mysterious physics breakthrough is also somehow tied into consciousness? And what if
Mm.
once you open that Pandora's box, it completely changes the complexion of reality in a way that we can't even imagine? Like, we're in the same way, it's like, you know what? I like you, Chris, but I don't think you need to have a nuclear bomb. I don't think you need to be able to get bio weapons, like there should be constraints on that stuff. Maybe what if disclosure could lead to something like that times 10,
Yep.
or times like whatever, that literally could make humanity cease to exist if
I
just the
Yeah.
wrong person got their hands on it. Like, that's the kind of stuff where if you are in Majestic, or you are one of like the few people that really know, like,
Yeah.
whatever it is, like, how would you grapple with that?
We have to assume that that's the case, because I think gatekeeping for the sake of being cool doesn't hold up for this long, and you don't kill people over that. You don't gatekeep. I think even money, to a certain extent, I think eventually it gets out. I think the truth has to be darker, or at least more, has to have more impact on humanity as a whole than we even know, and that we should know. I think that is the case. I think it has to be the case at this point. Maybe 40 years ago I might have disagreed. Keeping it a secret this long, generationally, after deathbeds have happened,
Hmm.
and people have still, only a few of them have really spoken on their deathbeds. Like, I mean, that it has to be pretty earth shattering, right? I also think that, what if the deepest bowels of the program,
Now you're
and
talking.
we've speculated on this, isn't extraterrestrials, isn't interdimensional beings, isn't ultra terrestrials. Perhaps those things all exist. And perhaps that's not the craziest part about it. Perhaps the craziest part is how our consciousness interfaces with reality. And that is the reason that they're seeking it out. That is the reason they created these gate projects. That is the reason they created all these secret spies and have all this research tied up. Perhaps it's the reason our consciousness is being suppressed through devices.
Hmm.
And these devices are getting more and more addictive, and we're spending more and more time in front of them, because if we suddenly grasp the idea that wave functions don't collapse randomly, that they collapse through really strong intention, then we become the masters of the universe, at least of our perception of the universe. And that could really, really throw the universe in for a loop. Not just our humanity, but maybe everything else that is tied to it,
Yeah.
that are living happily ever after on some other planet in another galaxy. Maybe our thought forms will completely change reality for everything, and that seems like a really, really important thing, and something that you'd want to keep secret.
Yeah,
We'd
man.
if I mentioned the Psi Games, like we were at the Psi
Yeah.
Games, and then I did this talk on mixed mediumship, and the idea that we're tapping into something during performance or during these flow states, that we can either precognize something, or maybe it's retrocausal, or maybe it's morphic field related, or maybe there's something that we can interact with. But then after that, you were there, I think. When I was at the table, they were doing the dowsing stuff. Were you there?
The
You might have been.
dowsing
I know
stuff.
Nelson was there, and there was the other guy, the French guy was there. Anyways, it was a table of people. They were doing the dowsing stuff on stage. They had 6 plates.
I don't think I was there. I don't think I was there.
So this is crazy because I just finished the talk about this mixed mediumship and what the ingredients are for creating these events. And for me as a magician, I found when I've asked hundreds of magicians, it always seems to be flow state, misplaced confidence, like a stupid confidence you have no business having, a knowing, something on the line, right? Something has to be on the line as well. There has to be no safety net. It has to be like a gut shot, kind of go for it. And there is maybe also a relationship between the audience, perhaps like a Pygmalion effect there, or some type of like where the audience believes that you are capable of doing this, almost like during a hypnosis. You have to believe that the hypnotist can hypnotize you in order to be hypnotized. It's like a weird loop thing. So if you have all those ingredients, miracles start to happen. I say miracles with a small and with lowercase m. It is these little synchronicities or coincidences that magicians have throughout their performances that they won't tell the audience about because it looks like it's part of the trick. But we, in fact, talk about it all the time amongst ourselves. And so it is this mixed mediumship that happens. Now, after I talk about this, I just had to talk on this. I go into the main room. They're doing a dowsing thing. So they got the contestants up on stage, and dowsing is the idea that you can perceive certain things using certain instruments, whether that's finding water, using dowsing rods, these 2 rods that kind of come together, whether it's using a pendulum or your hand, whatever you prefer. And so there's 6 plates on the ground. 2 of these have an element under them. One of them is silver and one of them is copper, little pucks of silver and copper. The goal for the people competing in this dowsing event is to, douse and then proceed to tell them where the silver is and where the copper is. It's a 1 in 30 chance that you get it right. It's, 1 over 6 times, or 5 over 6 times 6 over 6, or whatever it is. It's 1 in 30 that you get them both right. But nobody on stage got it. Now, I'm sitting around a table. I just finished my talk. There's maybe 7 or 8 of us here. And I turn to the person behind me and I say, silver's in 2, copper's in 5. And they go, how do you know that? I'm like, because it is. Very sternly. No business being this confident. Because it is. Did they tell you about it? No. But how do you know? Because that's what it is. That's what it is. I don't know what to tell you. Silver's in 2, copper's in 5. Just have a look. Let's sit here, and I guarantee you.
So this just came into your head. There was nothing that prompted it?
Yes. This is the type of things that magicians do sometimes because the payoff is so great. And if I get it wrong, what is it? I guessed wrong. Okay. There's no real downside to it. And so instead, I lean into it. I'm incredibly confident, as if I know. Not as if I know. I know. And I go, silver's in 2, copper's in 5. Guarantee you. I guarantee you. Let's have a look. And now they're all dowsing. They're all going through this thing. And the judges are now prompted to eliminate the plates that don't have anything. So they start with number 1, number 3, number 4, number 6. And now we know it's 2 and 5. Sure enough, number 2 had silver and number 5 had copper. I stand up and I take a bow. Everyone on the table was like, oh my God, that was insane. No one on stage had gotten it. And I'd just come back from my talk, talking about this very thing.
Yeah.
Talking about exactly what I just did.
Right. And what I love about that, sorry to interrupt you, but what I love about that is you like sort of establish this correspondence by sort of doing that and evoking this notion and then not planning to do it, but you had already sort of established this environment of that around yourself psychically or something. It makes an extra weird degree of sense to me.
So the question then becomes, what just happened?
Yeah.
Right? What is it that just happened? Again, the question of, is it precognitive? Did I tune into some type of quantum field that we all have access to of information? Is it retrocausal? Did I actually go feed myself certain information? Was it sensory sort of? But what I think, what I feel is true is that perhaps it was all suspended, right? All of the options were there, sort of this in the Schrodinger's sort of suspension. And I simply had, with the collective, belief of the people around me that I could do this faith exchange, I had the strongest intention in that room to collapse it in this way. Everyone else was kind of guessing. And that guessing energy is exactly what happens. And I think if no one concretizes that reality, it will collapse randomly. And I think that's what's happening. But sometimes I think you can have access. I just feel like this might be true rather than peering into the future, getting a sense. I think through confidence, through this misplaced confidence, through this flow state, through this Pygmalion sort of energy that you're picking up on, you can collapse reality at your disposal to whatever you want. This goes into manifesting. It goes into all these other, related scenarios. Now, obviously, there's no way of 100% proving that, because just because I have a method for something doesn't mean that that's how it works.
Yeah.
Right. It could be a combination of things. It could be something totally different. It could be random, whatever it is. But in that moment, I felt this is a perfect time to demonstrate what I just talked about. And I was able to successfully demonstrate it. 1 in 30 chance, not totally impossible, just enough for you to go, holy shit, maybe there's something here.
Yeah.
And I think that was a really cool confirmation personally, not only for the people around me, but personally for myself. I was like, God damn, there is something here, isn't there?
Yeah. Actually, three things. One, just to summarize Pygmalion myth again. The Pygmalion myth has to do with this king who, through his very strong intention, brings an actual statue of Aphrodite to life, like through
No,
his.
the statue was Galatea.
I thought.
He prayed to Aphrodite.
Oh,
So
okay.
it was the there was the festival of Aphrodite,
Yeah.
and he was just so over women and their flaws that
Yeah.
he wanted to make his own. He was a sculptor as
Well,
well.
I must have told the story wrong in my video then, because
Oh.
I told that story. But whatever. He through his intention, he brings this beautiful statue of this idealized woman to life. So it has become this
And
known
marries her,
thing.
and
Yeah, it's become this known thing in psychology where expectation sort of drives real outcomes. So if I you're a kid, your kid, Chris, let's say, and I'm like a mentor of yours, and I'm like,
yes,
Chris, I can tell maybe you're
yep.
struggling in math right now, but you can get an A. You're an A
No,
student. I know
you
you are.
will get an A.
Yeah. And then by setting that expectation in your mind, you sort of like it somehow makes
Yeah.
that outcome much more likely. And so that's sort of like the mundane version of it. And I think we've talked about this before, man. But the thing that I think is the missing piece here, and again, this is what Jung thought about synchronicity, is that there was this ancient concept in Western esoteric traditions of either sympathy or correspondence. And there's a few different ways to look at this. One is that there's this sort of symbolic language. And if you know how to manipulate that symbolic language, you can make an outcome occur through synchronistic things, through and this is where the idea of like, this this plant is somehow a symbol of this deity or this amulet, and I can put these energies into this amulet, that kind of stuff. But then another way to look at it is by you becoming like a thing, you attract the thing. And I think in
Sure.
your case, that's particularly important because you're doing all of these mercurial, magical, kind of reality bending things with almost everything you do, dude. Whether it's doing actual stage magic or it's your videos, you're bringing people into this mental space. You're like a midwife for people to go places with their minds. And you do that in meat space, and you do that in imaginal space, and you do that in digital space. And I almost feel like by doing that, you might be creating a correspondence that makes other stuff like that more likely to occur. So
Yeah.
so it's not even just like, this is my personal problem with manifestation, is it takes on this like, I like almost like I just want it to happen, so I'm going to make it happen because I want it. And I
Mm.
don't think that's how it works.
It's
I
not
think
how it
it's a
works.
more subtle language than that, that may be more akin to like what I was just saying, by you really have to be that thing. And then by
Yes.
being that thing, it just like brings it into reality somehow. And it's
That is
not
the
a
very
hundred
principle
percent.
of
Yeah.
manifesting. Yeah,
Yeah.
is living as though. There's so there was a this is really like eloquently put somewhere that I'm going to butcher it, but the idea that if you hold on to something, it doesn't happen, right? If you want it,
Yeah.
and the reason for that is because you're putting so much energy behind something. The natural state of the universe is to balance things out constantly. So if you really want it, the universe's reaction is going to make you not have it. Right? It's this balance of like I need it, I need it, I need it. And the universe is like, well, we got to balance that out. So you can't have that.
Yeah.
Right? Because you're putting that same energy. And so and only until you let go and say, oh, that would be cool if I got it, but I don't care if I don't, that's when it appears.
Right.
And that's like the natural flow, like going down a river. It's not going upstream, you're going with the flow. And things will come to you, if you kind of allow it to rather than force it to. If you force it to, you're putting too much emphasis, and therefore the universe is going to be like, now we got to balance that energy out. So I thought that was a really cool way of seeing it, because really didn't get like, why would the universe give it to me if I don't want it, like, but it's maybe a balance thing. Yeah.
Yeah. And it seems like we're also brushing up against some of the core mysteries around psi and all of this mental stuff. Where in the
Mm,
same way, like if you talk to someone like Adam Curry or any of these guys who have like actually really studied it, and it's just like, it's been decades. We can't find a mechanism. We can't find any. We find all of this statistical relevancy, but we can't pin it down to
mm.
even like any core numbers. It's always changing all the time. And that indicates that there's some dynamic principle at play that's always changing behind the scenes. And I think it has to do with something like what we're talking about, which also would dovetail in with this notion that's brought up in the remote viewing thing, where creating more entropy or doing something weird or novel at a site, like dumping the
Or playful, or
liquid
yeah.
nitrogen, like somehow alters something. And it's something that's not really rational, right? It's like there's nothing rational about that example you gave from Ed May about dumping liquid nitrogen at a site. It's not something about the liquid. Is that what it was? Liquid nitrogen? Is that what you
Yeah, it
said?
was just to show that any location that has a more entropic nature
Yeah.
will be easier for the remote viewer to pick up on, like
I'm
a moth to a flame,
I'm still not sure if I understand like why that's entropic, but I get why it's
because
novel.
there's a chemical reaction happening.
Okay.
That
Oh, like you're creating actual entropy.
Yes,
Okay, got it. Okay.
yeah, like what, and that's why like nuclear things are really easy to pick up on,
Okay.
or the loss of life, right? Because that
Wow.
as well would have an effect on that same level, um, you know. So yeah,
Yeah. Do you know about I only heard about this at the very end of the podcast I did with Dolan and Paul Smith, but they had both looked into this Argentinian case. Um Paul remote viewed it as part of Stargate, and
I think I heard about this.
Dolan found it so compelling that it's the one remote viewing case that he included in one of his books, I guess. But it's like a case where there was some Argentinian, I think it was a tanker. I don't think it was military. I think it was just some big tanker that essentially was found as a ghost ship with nobody on it. A bunch of the Stargate remote viewers, including like Bill Ray, Paul Smith, I think McMonagle also, if I'm not mistaken, all remote viewed it blindly. And they
Hmm.
all were like, something showed up and took the people, or basically made the people cease to exist. But that could be an
Well,
interesting example of like a very entropic situation, because you have, if it
life. Yeah.
ended.
Yeah, that's a great change. That's a big change.
Right.
If you're looking at like a spike in sort of energy or wherever it is, I mean, life to no life is a big difference there.
Yeah.
So that's a change. If I wonder if those people were instantly replaced with other people, if you'd even pick up on it.
Yeah, I don't know, man.
You know what I
Yeah,
mean?
we're getting into some fun territory. I do have to bring this up to you too. I told you this over text because it was one of those things that as soon as I got that little scoop, I was just like, "Ooh, this is novel, bro." Because by the time this one comes out, that episode will be out. But the thing I
Right.
told you about,
The Nimitz?
yes, yeah, man, that
Yeah.
was really interesting to me. Not just because it's a great story, but because to me there are downstream implications that I don't know the answer to, but now I may try to gently prod Paul further on because so I'll retell the story quick, but
Mhm.
so I did this podcast with Paul Smith, the remote viewer, and Richard Dolan. We're talking to him in the beginning, and I basically just asked him, because he kept saying I've always been very reluctant to talk about UFOs. I think some of my colleagues in remote viewing talk about it in really irresponsible ways, so I just don't want to be associated with it. But I've changed my mind recently. So I said, "Well, what was it that changed your mind? Like, was there a specific case or?" And then he said, "Well, it was a Nimitz case for me because there are so many streams of data." And he said something like, even strains of data the public doesn't know about or something.
Mm.
And and he said he heard about it earlier, like before it was public. So I asked him, like, how did you hear about it earlier? And he said, well, I guess I can talk about this. I'm not sure how much I can say. I do have an NDA, but I was hired to put together a team. We got a facility. We put together 3 gray rooms, exactly like the rooms that we used at Fort Meade. We had like admin people, and we for a full week remote viewed, including this Nimitz case.
I have this NDA, and I'm not sure what I can say. I was hired to put together a team of people to remote view that incident.
Wow.
Can we ask if this was part of the OSAP or ATIP programs, Paul?
Oh,
Is that
it might have been.
And he sort of
They
said,
didn't know it was Nimitz, did they?
he says they did not know. Yes.
Because they can't know if it's
Right. He said Hal. So then this gets juicier if you're into the lore because he says it was Hal Puthoff that hired them, and Dolan said, "Can we ask if this is part of OSAP?" And he's like, and Paul said, "Oh, it might have been," like with a big smile on his face. So basically indicating yes. And then he said after the fact, Hal basically told him that that's what the target was. Like after they had all done the stuff, he says he doesn't have access to it. But then, unfortunately, you know how it is sometimes when you're in the throes of a conversation and suddenly it's over and you're like, "Oh my god, I can't believe I didn't ask more about this."
yeah.
But one of the immediate questions I have is, you had a facility for a full week, 3 remote viewing rooms, a whole staff, and that's all you did? Like, what else did you do that week? Like, what were the other targets? Like, what, and also, to me, it also implies that we know that this is probably not the only time that this has
No,
happened.
absolutely. Yeah, that for me, that's the biggest takeaway.
Yeah.
Like, obviously, remote viewing, cool shit is awesome, but remote viewing itself, the fact that, obviously we know this as being a great additional intelligence gathering method that supplements SIGINT, Humint, Massent, all these other intelligent gathering platforms. It's just a supplement. It's an extra one, and that for me is the most convincing reason why they would still do it. Many people think, well, no, like they said in the 1996 was a Dateline thing where they were talking about debunking it. Said, oh, it never worked. He lied by omission by saying, well, we would never use remote viewing as a single source of intel to, detect something. Or you would never use anything as a single source of intel to detect. Like you would never, in order to strike, let's say, this facility, overseas, you wouldn't just do that based on a satellite photo.
Yeah.
You would need the satellite photo. You would need signals intelligence, so maybe radar movement or detecting certain radars around there. You would need people on the ground, so human intelligence agents that are, and you take all of these different intelligence gathering platforms to paint a picture. Now, let's say I did all this and I had what the building looked like, and we knew what type of radar they had there, which are the radar that kind of like are normally found around intercontinental ballistic missiles. And then we also know that there are these type of vehicles on the ground, and we know that there are at least this many soldiers. We give a random number to one of the Stargate guys, and he or she comes up with the same shit.
Yeah.
You know, like that's what remote viewing is.
Yeah.
It's not, oh, let's trust the remote viewer and go raid this village. No, it's an extra intelligence and if it's a 1-for-1 match on the size of the building and everything else, and then the remote viewer provides additional information that they didn't know, saying that, oh, there are 32 hostages in that building.
Yeah.
You know, now it becomes like, oh, wait a second. We didn't tell this guy about the hostages. How does he know about the hostages? How does he, you know, so then that gives you enough confidence to know that this stuff works and it's cheap.
Right.
Man, is it cheap. A gray room, a pencil, and a pad. Like, dude, get these guys some pizza. And like, we've got, you know, some of the most sophisticated intelligence platforms that have ever existed. So yeah, that to me, obviously they continue doing it, but it's a great piece of confirmation to those who think they didn't.
Yeah.
Is knowing that, hey, yes, it's still going on. Obviously it's going on. Wake up.
Two things on that is one thing it evokes is there's also things that remote viewing gives you access to, at least potentially, allegedly, that you could never get with a satellite or with some drone that can see through walls. I'm just trying to like think of other like advanced intelligence platforms that we can't even imagine, because people like Lynn, according to his story at least, figured out he was the best on the team or one of the best at the team of accessing minds. So they would give him what did they call it, like intentions and planning targets or something, like what is this person intending, what are they planning. So he happened to be there during some of the Iraqi conflict stuff, so they kept tasking him with Saddam Hussein, like what is Saddam Hussein thinking, what is he intending. You can't do that with anything else, you know, like, so that could, and if of course you have to make sure that that's legit and you get some feedback on that somehow, but
again, you probably have another piece of information you can connect that to or attach that to verify. You know, if Saddam, for instance, you know, if you have intel saying that one of his mistresses, you know, just left him or whatever, or he killed one of his mistress or whatever it is. If you know, and then Lynn doesn't know that, but Lynn then says, oh, there's something going on relationship wise. He feels very angry, feels slighted, feels, you know, then you can be like, oh my God, he's picking up on that thing, you know, and that gives you extra confirmation that that thing is true.
Right. Yeah. So that kind of stuff is just absolutely wild.
It's never. Yeah. Sorry.
No.
I was going to say it's because people get it confused a lot with remote viewing. They seem to think it's like this. Oh, you know, we're going to depend our entire objective, our entire mission on this one person who is drawing some doodles and writing some words down. No, they've got so many sophisticated ways of gathering intelligence. This is a supplement. Why wouldn't you do it if it costs nothing?
And when you start talking to like really high quality people like Paul, like it's just, it gets harder and harder to just discount. And plus they don't make it sound like this magical foolproof thing. No. He talks all the time about how, oh, I didn't do a very good job with that one. I wish I would have done this or wish I would have done that. Like they acknowledge that it is not this 100% magical foolproof thing, while also having unbelievable hits that you just can't, you either have to construe some crazy lie psyop sort of narrative around the whole thing, or you have to acknowledge that there's some truth here and there's some reality here.
Yeah. And you don't know the half of it. You don't know, you don't know 90% of the targets.
Yeah.
Like we have no idea to this day. because out of those 505 missions that were done during Stargate, none of them are declassified.
Yeah.
You know, those missions are not declassified. They're still classified to this day. To think that like, oh, they declassified all the Stargate stuff. No, they didn't.
No.
All those missions were held from different intelligence communities that they themselves have their own, clearances for. They can't just lump sum it all. That's so many different things. That's 17 intelligence agencies out of 19 that used Stargate. And, if you look at just the Joint Task Force, they used Stargate 142 times for 142 separate missions during that 20-year period.
Yeah.
What?
Yeah.
You'd think after 10 times, you'd be like, this is bullshit. What makes somebody go back 142 times if it doesn't work?
Yeah.
Fire someone. What are you doing using these people if it doesn't work 142 times? That's insanity.
Yeah.
Maybe 30, maybe 40, 140. That's an insane number if you really think about that. If you really think about like, hey, we're going to use these guys again. We know it didn't work 141 times, but we're going to use them one last time. No, of course it worked.
Right.
And it worked so well, they were able to intercept all these like drug smuggles along the coastline using Joint Task Force, which probably aided in fluffing up their black budgets. But
yeah, dude.
Another discussion.
Yeah. The other thing I was going to say before I forget is, have you seen the SAIC documents where of Ed May corresponding with SAIC? Like some of those documents are up on
I've not.
archive.org, and you
Really?
can see that like they're essentially getting all the documents and potentially taking the project over. And there's redactions in there. Like it like Ed's name is in there, but whoever he's talking to, that name's redacted. There's like other elements of it, but there's all these like correspondence going back and forth on SAIC letterhead saying like, you should, I just sent you like however many pounds of documents and data, and they're talking about we need to have a what did they call it? I don't know. Basically, they were talking about getting a blue ribbon panel. That's what it was. They were talking about getting a panel of scientists together to review all the documentation and basically decide if they're going to go forward with just taking it over. That's what it looks like, and you're only seeing very sparse little pieces of communication, but it's there. And these documents have like 100 views on archive.org, but they're just sitting up there. Hopefully I'm not blowing up the spot by saying this, but
no, I think, but I mean, I don't think it's a secret to many of us that know that SAIC probably took on Stargate and all the other, psi related projects. And, once it gets into the hands of private corporation, they're protected through, intellectual property. You can't subpoena them. And so that's the way it goes. That's also, was it Tom DeLonge that mentioned that like, at the SAIC building in front of it, there was like these statues of Atlantean sculptures.
I remember that story. I didn't remember that it was SAIC, but yeah, I remembered it was someplace.
It was SAIC, which is also interesting. They're holding pyramids, and there's like very Stargate-esque.
Yeah,
these guys, and they're doing well. They're doing pretty good. The government money's all right.
Rolling in,
yeah. Sending so much money in their direction. Like, I mean, yeah, you'd have to assume that some pretty important work being done over there. If you look at, UAP GURB's videos diving into these corporations, they're getting billions of dollars, so much money. So you'd have to expect that they're providing some results.
Yeah, that's why I really like his work, where even though he approaches it in a totally different way than I do, I love that he finds a way to just like root out these documents and these people and create these relationships.
Looks at the bids.
And yeah, dude, he goes so deep. I love that. I don't know if I want to say this yet on the air, but I'm just going to say it to you now. I'm already starting to like, now I derailed myself by thinking about that. Well, have you gone? I know GURB, and you've had him on, and I loved that episode, dude. He's just like an encyclopedia of knowledge. But on that note of the continuing the Stargates, that was spooky. On that note of continuing the Stargate stuff, have you learned anything novel about any of that that's like shareable?
Not necessarily on the Stargate stuff, but definitely, you know, there's this conversation that we had towards the end of the podcast, which he was able to fill me in a little bit more off camera because he's it's a witness that he's talking to, and he says that on the podcast, and he said that this witness was a program guy that we, you know, we don't know him. He's not a public guy. Nobody knows this guy. But that Gurb basically chased down for like a long time to like he found like through private corporations and government contractors and through bids and whatever, he found who he thought might be involved in such a program. And so we went there and started finding names.
Yeah.
And found a guy. And this took a long time. I'm talking like almost maybe a year. And then eventually the guy kind of like spilled the beans to him off camera. I was like, you know, obviously not on camera. And that's the type of work that Gerb will do. It isn't people that come to him being like, I'm a whistleblower.
Yeah.
Trust me, bro. Here's my... No, Gerb finds them, knocks on their door, kicks the door down over and over and over. That's what he does, man. He's a brave motherfucker. Like I could not do what Gerb does. I'm glad someone's doing it. I hope he's doing it. I hope he's going to be safe, and I give him all the sort of psychic protection that I can provide.
Yeah. Well, once you become a psychic eunuch, you'll be able to, because you're going to lose your testosterone. So you're not going to be interested in kicking the doors down, but you can provide him psychic protection at least.
But he's a big guy too.
Yeah.
He's my height. It's like 6'2", 6'3". He's, you know, he's a fighter too. He likes jiu-jitsu. He can handle himself. But yeah, he's a perfect guy for this stuff. And he gets this guy to open up about, you know, a program that he might be in. And the guy starts telling him that, you know, he would be in a room among other people, driven there like burlap sack over the head type deal every day for hours, and then put in a room and had to interface with a sphere, like some type of orb.
Yeah.
And that this orb would, you know, I don't want to get into too much detail because it's not my place to break this story, but I'll say what he said on the podcast. It was he was able to sort of perceive time, consciously interact with this orb and sort of perceive time. And that was like one of the, you know, now you think of Looking Glass. It reminds me of that Gate whistleblower that talked about this. It reminds me of who else noted the sphere, but there's, you know, I mean, obviously Bob Lazar talks about Project Looking Glass. We have, it was Dan Burrish also talked about a sphere in Project Looking Glass. And so it, you know, it gets higher in the conviction scale.
Right.
When you find out how this information from Gerb was attained.
Yeah.
That it wasn't some guy finding Gerb, that it was a guy that Gerb hunted down like a fucking predator. He zoned in on him. He's like, hey man, you're going to talk. And the guy eventually talked.
Did he by chance say anything about plasma to you when he was talking about this?
No.
Okay.
Not plasma. But yeah, so that was like one of the things where like, and what's funny is like Gerb doesn't know what to do with that.
Yeah.
He talked to me about it. He's like, dude, this sounds too like far out for me. Gerb's like, I want to know where you're keeping these things. I want to know where the nuts and bolts are.
Right.
He's like, show me a craft, you know, bodies maybe. But like when it comes to like the spooky conscious interaction with tech stuff, you know, he might feel it's a bit of out of his wheelhouse. He's like, time? Hold on a second. Wasn't ready for that one.
Well, dude, let me just say, two things to just like throw into this mix that might belong there, might not belong there. But based on things like I've heard and put together, one, I think there's some recognition that there's a relationship between plasma and consciousness. that
Right.
is not very well understood, but I know some people in the psi community are very interested in this. And I mean, I won't go too far, but Adam Curry even kind of indicated this in some stuff he said to me during our podcast, um, kind of encouraging me to read certain books and look into certain things having to do with plasma. So I thought that was interesting. But and getting even more out there, the book on plasma that you hear about more than any other one is this book, The New Science of Heaven, and I'm forgetting the name of the author who wrote it. But it starts very scientific, but gets extremely woo really fast. And I've seen him on I think it was Jeffrey Mishlov's podcast on New Thinking Aloud or something. He openly talks about the idea of like psychically connecting to like plasma based beings and plasma based beings like manifesting to him and stuff like that. So I don't know, man. I think there could be a relationship between this sphere object containing some kind of a plasmatic
Hmm.
consciousness, or maybe if it's not a consciousness, it's something that responds or augments your consciousness psionically. And because that's what psionic is supposed to be, right?
Yep.
Psionic, like electronic. It's supposed to be some sort of
Yep.
merging of mind and
Technology.
yeah. So I don't know. There could be something there. And it also just sounds like scrying. Like if you look into magical practices, basically it's almost always done as a two-person team where you have a person who's doing the um who's like reciting the thing and is like putting all the intention in. And then there's a scryer who's like the partner to that person. And they're basically just like staring into like an obsidian mirror or something.
Mm-hmm.
And then the thing appears to them, or the vision appears to them in the mirror. If you go back into all the Enochi and John Dee stuff, this is how all of that is done. If you look into any of these grimoire practices, that's
I
basically
mean, Harry
how
Potter has the pensieve.
right. So yeah, man. It sounds like potentially a more modern, um, exotic version of something that's already pretty exotic and like,
But that makes sense,
yeah,
though. That
yeah,
makes sense that we would go in that direction. Like we mentioned this, I think, at the beginning of the podcast, where it's like where you have this stuff that has existed for a long time. Naturally, we would just see how we can amplify it using our technology, or even better, using theirs.
yeah,
You know, I mean, it's got to be the number one priority here. The number one priority isn't to sit around in a circle and hum and try to leave your body. They've gotten past that. Now it's like, take these meds, these will kick in. You're going to leave your body. Once you leave your body, we need you to go and build this weird structure in the fifth dimension. And, and then we're going to power up our machine to amplify your power in the fifth dimension. Like that's what I feel like we're getting at if we're,
yeah,
I don't think we're tiptoeing around in this stuff anymore too lightly. I think we've gotten to the point probably, especially if we are using their tech. I think
alien
the
tech.
I think the baseline for that tech is the conscious interface. I think that's
Right.
that's the baseline of it, right? And now what you can do with this might be, again, if we look at the crafts that Bob Lazar allegedly worked on, or any of the other crafts that are depicted in modern UFO lore, they're pretty barren. They have nothing going on, right? So they're kind of task oriented, kind of like built to purpose type deal, like Matt Brown said, or, there's these, but also we find that the beings themselves, in so many cases, if the beings stray from the craft, the beings would die. And now we don't have a way of controlling the craft. So, if I were to make some type of monitoring system and would have to employ or provide these biologics on board in order to perhaps do genetic experiments on the local population, whatever the task requires that I need beings for, I would make it so that, if the being dies, you can't fly the craft. There's no frickin' way that you can do that.
Mm-hmm.
And so that psionic link, I think, is fundamental. The skin of the craft we're talking about, like how some people say the craft felt alive. Like I think there is this psychic connection, this psionic connection to the entire gamut of technology that's available to non-humans. And if you think about that too, if it's on like this quantum field, that means, these things can be triggered, controlled, monitored from the greatest distances at any point in time. It's just so impressive. If it's a real thing. If it's a real thing, it's very impressive. Very like, wow, the capabilities of this stuff is just beyond human comprehension. Like, if you can unlock that next level of quantum interfacing, I mean, everything becomes possible, man. It becomes it becomes the atomic age again,
Yeah.
but on steroids.
Yeah. So there's another story Lynn told me. He says after he retired from the service, he was on a project, couldn't tell me what it was, but he said this project afforded him like an insane clearance, like, you know, T what is it? Is it top secret SCI? Is that what it is?
SCI, yeah.
Compartmentalized something
Yeah.
information. But then there was another thing after that was TSI PSYOP or something, but it's not that kind of PSYOP. It's like a different acronym for something. But anyway, he said he was at a facility out west somewhere, and it's like it's one of those where you can make deductive guesses,
Yeah.
roughly.
I'm gonna say Los Alamos.
It could be that. It could be that. I took it as maybe I don't know. But
What did you take it as?
I took it as maybe like a Lockheed related facility.
Yeah, it could be. Yeah.
But I'm also basing that off something else that I'll tell you in a second. But so I don't know if you saw any of this podcast, but toward the end, he like really starts to let the stories rip, and the sort of culminating biggest, craziest stories are: one, he claims he had an abduction experience where he was one of the only people who maintained consciousness, but there were other people who were in a sort of like an inanimate state that were in some sort of like hypnotic, just frozen kind of state, but he wasn't. He got out of it, or was never quite in it. And then he started interacting with one of the beings and was brought into the area where there's like the where it's controlled. And he said the controls basically only consist of a handprint, and that's it. Like, you just put your hand on it. And he was super intrigued by it because he's always been like intrigued by vehicles and piloting and all this stuff. And the alien said something like, there's no way your hand could fit this. Like, it's,
and he's like, my hand, I have big hands.
Yes, that's exactly what he says. So then he puts it on the thing, and like basically the point of the story is he thinks that he actually was maybe trying to be recruited to like pilot something, which is so crazy to say, right? But then he claims that later on he had this super high clearance, right, after his time in the service, and he ran into an old friend, and his friend was like, "Oh, what are you doing here?" He's like, "I can't tell you." And then he asks his friend, "What are you doing?" He was like, "I can't tell you." So then he figures out what Lynn's clearance is, and he's like, "Okay, maybe I can tell you, actually, because you basically have like everything." So he eventually takes him into like a wreckage room where it's just all wrecked airframes and like materials that are just like strewn all over this hangar. And then he kind of takes him into an area where he's kind of like, you be quiet, come over here. And he shows him something. And before he can even tell him what it is, Lynn's like, "I know what that is. That's from a UFO." And he said he like said it way too loud, and it was immediately like everybody turned their head and was just like, "What the fuck is this guy doing in here?" But he said it looked exactly like whatever he saw on that ship that day, like the same exact kind of a panel with like a handprint and whatever. But here's the weird part, dude.
Wow.
Is I was watching part of that podcast Jesse did with Giorgiani.
Mm-hmm.
Giorgiani spent time with Lynn, and apparently Lynn told him even more stuff.
Whoa.
Which is like that he was in this, it sounded like in this same occasion that I'm talking about, he was brought like underground somewhere and was shown like an actual collision that had occurred between a UFO and a plane. So it's just like this story just keeps getting crazier and crazier, but it's too good not to tell. And I don't even remember why I got on this topic to begin with.
Who cares?
But, yeah,
it's a sick story.
right. Yeah. So I don't know if
psionics.
it's true,
We're talking about psionics.
Yeah. Right. Exactly. Yes. So yeah, the idea is that it's just something to do with a telepathic link in a hand, and that's it.
Yeah.
according to this at least. And I don't know if that jives with anything else you've heard or like what Bob says about the
I
control
mean, yeah.
panel.
Well, Bob, there was no control panel.
Okay.
You know, that's the whole thing, is that like he suspected that maybe the third floor, which he didn't have access to, was where everything was controlled. Because otherwise they were just sitting down in these three things that he assumed were chairs. By the way, he'll never say they were chairs definitively. They look like chairs. He was like, who knows what they're for? I think they're chairs. And they're also the formation of the chairs is really specific too, because they're like equidistant in a triangular formation, equidistant from the reactor, right? And then the amplifiers are also like everything is like very geometrically perfect where they're sitting. And so it feels like this is like you would need all three pilots maybe to be there to pilot this thing, so that, you know, some type of geometric occurrence needs to be in place for everything to work properly. I don't know. But it does seem like geometry is a big deal when you look at how perfect everything is from a macro to atomic scale. Allegedly, these crafts are, you know, everything is geometrically like made in like an impossible vacuum of perfection,
right?
You know, and that is, you know, if you look at cymatics or you look at like, you know, just ancient geometry, it seems like it's an important ingredient that we just haven't completely wrapped our minds around yet.
Yeah, dude. And you know,
and there are people like you know, Billy Carson or you know, whoever, who will just kind of say, no, it's, you know, the triangular formation of the quantum thing is that, and it's just all buzzwords. We don't know exactly what the heck is going on, but yeah, I do believe that that is an important thing.
Well, here's what we do know, man, is that there has been an ancient obsession with sacred geometry that has been handed down through initiatory knowledge, that has been concealed within texts. Like, so Plato's Republic is a huge work, man. It's 130,000, 40,000 words or whatever. It's a big, long, meandering story that goes through all kinds of different things. They've discovered harmonic principles that are like concealed beneath the surface of the text. The golden ratio is embedded right at the golden ratio of the whole text itself, and they're talking about the divided line at that point in the text, which in and of itself is a golden ratio. So it's like there's that kind of stuff, and then you start looking at all of the sacred geometric principles that are within all of these megalithic structures. And people like Randall Carlson, who I just had a couple conversations with recently, he really does think that there is a lost technology. Like there is some kind of lost technology that has something to do with geometry. And
geometry is an ingredient.
Yes.
I don't think it is like, you know, you can't just put things in perfect symmetry and then be like, "Ooh, a portal." I don't think it's that simple. It's probably a key ingredient, and then there's like intention. There's like conscious interfacing somehow with that stuff. There is probably also precession of like the stars and like the the Earth's sort of magnetism and like all these ingredients together. I think, but I do think geometry obviously, you know, if only symbolic, plays a really important role in our history.
And guess what else he thinks is involved? Plasma.
Yeah,
he does. He thinks it's so he thinks too, and I don't know these people, and I don't know what he's basing this on, but he seems convinced that there are these people who are working on some kind of technology now that is starting to replicate some of these effects through plasma and through a combination of arranging things in a certain geometric structure with certain substances and then creating plasma out of that stuff. I don't know. I can't speak to any of it, but he's a very smart guy and he definitely seems to think it's true. So I don't know, man. It's super interesting.
Who knows? Probably all too smart for my level of knowledge when it comes to, you know, math and stuff. So
well, okay. So now that we're on to sort of things that we think could be true, It's always fun to ask because you really are a person who has embraced the lore. You talk a lot about suspending belief, whatever. And I asked you this question last time, all of that said, what do you lean toward with high conviction? And we talked about Lazar last time. I know that,
Mm-hmm.
but what else do you lean toward with high conviction, if anything? Like
More
yeah,
and more, I think the idea that reality is absolutely malleable and almost to a ridiculous like state. Like I think that barring the laws of our physical nature, the ones we have to abide by, time and space, and all this stuff, keeping that in mind, keeping those guidelines in mind, I think you can literally mold reality using principles that are fundamental. I'm not saying you can just turn yourself into an Easter bunny,
yeah.
but they're using the laws that we have to abide by in this physical existence. I think you can, outside of that, play with everything. So play with circumstance, play with chance, play with perception, play with illusionary things, play with um play with our perception of reality. I think that is absolutely malleable. um and maybe it took my journey as a hard-nosed skeptic magician to realize that it is that way. And I think that that's a beautiful thing too. I think that the arc is there for a reason. In a good story, we like a good arc. We don't like somebody just being born and figuring everything out and then just knowing that for existence, never really it's good to learn and then be like, oh no, I was wrong. And so yeah, I think that that is all within our grasp. And the more you look into this stuff, the more that like these hermetic principles seem to be at the foundation of it and seem to somehow everything relates to it to a certain level. So philosophically, I think hermeticism and that those seven foundational principles, I think, can be adapted to absolutely everything as far as our perspective of reality goes.
Hmm. Yeah, I love that. And even on a more basic, zoomed out level, what I think speaks to that is, bro, we were having a conversation about something semi annoying yesterday, right? Like from a creative standpoint. But it's one of those things where when you zoom out on the entirety of you've been doing this a long time, I've been doing this a long time. When I put myself back in the place of like starting out bootstrapping from literal zero, literal no audience, literal no one gives a shit what I'm saying. I have no money. And I figured out how to like get from there to here. And even more so for you, like you've had just so much success. And I'm assuming you had sort of a similar beginning where you just like, you started from absolutely like just
Yeah.
almost nothing.
Yep.
It's that in and of itself is so miraculous and crazy. Like,
It's alchemy.
it is, man. Like, I mean, when I just think about like where I grew up, no one around me was doing this. No one around me had a podcast. No one around me like was even thinking about this stuff. And yet, like just that right there, man. The fact that that's possible to just
Mm-hmm.
decide, have this nebulous inkling of I might want to do something like that, and then
Mm-hmm.
fast forward 8 or 9 years,
Physicalize a
and it's just
thought
like
and
it's like whoa. Like it's it really is crazy, man. And I really can sometimes have those moments where I'm just like, wow. Like I
do
feel
you,
like I have
do
a
you know what's
long way
cool?
to go, but still, even where I'm at now, I can appreciate where I came from for sure.
Definitely. Yeah, I think that's important to stop and do that also. I think that's a valid exercise. And what's cool, like the offshoot of that, is that I've in the other endeavor that I had on YouTube, I found like a really really big amount of success there, and got swept away by the things that didn't matter, and it emotionally had me sort of plummet mentally, everything, even like to an extent financially because of it. And it was all this, and now it's this sort of rebuilding from there and realizing that I'm at the same kind of crossroad
Mm.
that I was faced with. I'm faced with the same decisions essentially. But now I have to decide, to not go for the shiny object or not, you know what I mean? And in that, I find, I think that's so cool because if you get to a certain point, after having fallen from the top, and I'm not saying that that's what happened to me, but like proverbially, like kind of fall and have to climb back up the mountain. The appreciation you have for everything is so much greater. Everything's more vibrant now.
Mm-hmm.
Everything has, more meaning, and so you also learn in that to appreciate others more and help uplift them a lot more because now that the achievements aren't sustainable for your happiness. They're not, they're kind of empty, but you also know that others need to feel those achievements in order to realize it's not where it's at. And so
Yeah.
helping other people achieve things is really nice. I find myself, I had a friend recently, or not recently, it was a little while ago, but he was going through a really hard time. The guy has like 4 kids and like his wife was cheating on him, like this whole like really bad scenario. And
Man.
he's like, what do I do? And this is a long, probably about like 3-4 years ago. And I remember, and he was really in a bad way at this point. And I remember telling him, hey man, like just kind of smiling, no, I shouldn't be smiling at this. What am I doing? And I remember thinking I'm like, damn dude, I can't wait to meet the person you're going to become, because of this.
Through
And I
that
was excited.
initiation.
I was in that moment genuinely excited for this person. And although I told him, I was like, this doesn't make sense right now, man. I know this is not what you want to hear, but I can't wait to meet that guy because that guy's going to teach me some things too. And
see, I gotta stop you right there because that's an example of the kind of magic that you do, bro. Because that you planted something open ended and nebulous enough in his mind, but also that you saw as true. And it was like a down the road, like there's a distant light here, and I know what that is. I know that like generally that's going to be him on the other side of this initiation that he doesn't even see yet because he's just in the pain of it. But that's the
Yeah.
kind of thing that like can really kind of just seed down deep in someone's subconscious and just like blossom into something huge.
Yeah, and it did. He's doing great, and has a new girlfriend and everything's all sort of rectified seemingly. And but it isn't without me sort of struggling, that I would have had that type of foresight. And so really, really, really cliche to say, but like really glad for all the downs and all the hardships that comes along with life, where you get to a point where you can be appreciative of the hardships more than annoyed by them, or more than, you kind of now have this like removed sense of perspective where you're like, oh yeah, this is going to teach me something. All right, let's go, and it's fun that way because now you can watch others go through it and look at them, through a hopeful eye and through like a positive perspective rather than, taking everything at face value. And much like we talked about earlier in the podcast, being like, this is bad, that's bad. Why is everything bad happening to me? Why are these people all mean and evil? And it's like, well, zoom out. And you've gone through enough to where you can now appreciate what's going on here.
Yeah.
You'd be like, oh shit, this is all just alchemy. I'm going to turn this lead into gold,
Yeah, brother. Yeah, that's so well put. And that's such a good note to like come close to wrapping this up on. But it, one of those, I wanted to just say this, like one of those moments for me that really felt like just a surreal win, strangely, is remember how I didn't stay at the hotel during side games because I
Right.
like
Yeah.
screwed up my booking.
Yeah.
Um
Yeah. You booked like next year.
yeah, I booked no, I booked for like I don't know, I booked the wrong day, so I couldn't stay in the cool hotel. But I think it was the first night, and I don't even remember exactly what was going on, but we were all hanging out, all having such a good time, meeting so many cool people, just being a part of just a beautiful time where it almost felt like there are moments during that night I'm like, this almost feels like this could be like an afterlife party or something, where it's just like
Yeah.
there's so many cool people in one space. And it's like you turn here and you meet a cool person. You turn there and you meet a cool person. You turn there and there's your friend. You turn there and there's your friend. And then I finally am like, all right, I'm tired. I'm gonna go to bed. And it was just like that wooded driveway leading from the Omni. It was just like silent, and I just had this moment of just like overwhelming gratitude of just like, fuck, like this is one of those days that is just like, I, I can't believe all the things like led up to me being here. And now I'm here and this is just so amazing. And now it's over, but it was amazing. It's just moments like that, man. And more like, knock on wood, the promise of more moments like that, like are why I do. I mean, yeah, now it's a living as well. Those are like the really, like, I'm already looking forward to events next year,
Same.
man. Like it's beautiful, and I'm glad to have you as a friend as part of it, dude. Because I
Likewise.
genuinely enjoy our hangs, and
Me too.
it's just mirthful, wonderful times.
And now it's 1:11 p.m.
We better stop it here. All right, man. Love you, dude. Thanks for doing the
Love you
pod.
too, man. Yeah. Thanks for having me, and thanks for everybody for watching.